Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining me on a panel that I consistently forgot what time it was supposed to be on or at. I'm really excited to do this panel because I loved Tarnished Are the Stars and I loved Fire Becomes Her so much. They were so amazing. Oh, and I am just so excited to be doing this panel and be chatting with Rosiee. Just a general kind of announcement, I suppose. We don't tolerate any harassment or any kind of, comments that are in that realm, and so then you will be kind of blocked, and that will be very sad for you, and you will have deserved it. So anyway, I will let Rosiee introduce the books, and then we'll just go on.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. I'm Rosiee Thor. I'm a YA author of Tarnished Are the Stars and Fire Becomes Her. Oh boy, this is reversed for me. So, Tarnished Are the Stars is a kind of science fantasy with steampunk vibes about three queer teens who have to save their planet from an epidemic of heart disease. And Fire Becomes Her is a 1920s inspired fantasy about an ambitious girl who has to choose between her head and her heart during an election where magic buys votes.
Yes, I loved the combination in Fire Becomes Her of like magic and political campaigning. I thought it was really fun.
I just was like many of us, I think, very frustrated and overwhelmed by election news when I was writing it. I wrote it mostly in 2019 and 2020. So like those are like big years for that stuff. And I was really, really anxious about it. And part of me was like, okay, well, we should write about something nice and fluffy and happy that will like take our mind off of it. But I couldn't do that. Like my brain was just unwilling to cooperate in that regard. So instead, I just wrote about it. And that was actually much more cathartic and way easier for me than I thought it was going to be.
Yeah, it gave me like it brought back days where I would kind of just like comfort watch like West Wing basically to like have a future in which there was a little
Yes.
bit, or not a future, I guess like a parallel, whatever,
Yeah.
maybe universe.
The West
Um,
Wing is a huge inspiration for me. It was my comfort show in college. I discovered it like during a really bad time in my life, and so it's definitely like a huge comfort show for me. Anytime I can put on the West Wing in the background, it's just like, ah, how nice. Except it's like this weird parallel universe, like you said, where everything is like fine, but like everything's not fine. It's so flawed, and looking back at it, it's just like, wow, they do so much in there that I'm just like, no, thank you. That's not okay. But at the time, it was like this alternate universe where if like the election had gone the other way, kind of a thing. And so it was so cathartic to just experience people who were competent at their jobs doing what they're doing. And yeah, I think it was very much the same kind of energy of like trying to capture that feeling of it's politics, but how can I like make it a little bit less scary? How can I make it a little bit more accessible? How can I make it something that feels something I can actually impact?
Yeah, and I think that it brings me to one of the things that I loved the most about Fire Becomes Her, which was the world building. Like not only the politics system and the integration of flair slash flicker into politics, but also then just general like the prohibition style vibes. I feel like
Mhm.
that I got. I felt like there were so many for the world building. There was that great level of like underground kind of establishments, and then also then like politics campaigning on trains,
Mhm.
basically, and
Yeah.
doing tours.
Yeah, well, I was a history major in college. That was my field. And so I've always drawn on history a little bit. And you can kind of see that in Tarnished where it's like feels a little bit historical inspired, kind of Victorian. And that's because that book used to be historical fiction. In the first drafts, it was historical fiction. And then I was like, what if instead in space? And like went from there. But with Fire Becomes Her, the original idea for the book was, fire magic, voting, elections, and I didn't have like a grounded setting for it. And so I really wanted to pick something that felt very glamorous on the outside, but with like this very insidious underbelly of oppression and control from the government and things like that. And so I landed on the 1920s as an inspiration, like place to draw inspiration, because I felt like that was the kind of a time period that has been glorified a lot. It's this era of epic fashion and speakeasies and jazz, and it has all of this incredible culture, and we choose to focus on that, and like, excuse the weird metaphor, but like we tilt the camera up to the rich people and we look at them and we see their lives at Great Gatsby and we celebrate that. And we never really look at what else was going on. Who else was existing during this period? Who else had lives that were impacted by this extravagance? And so I really wanted to dig into that. And that felt like the right vibe for it because it was a cultural touchstone that a lot of people would connect with. And then it would kind of just turn the camera lens a little bit.
Yeah, I think that perfectly kind of, because that was something that as I was writing the questions, I was having the kind of difficulty is like sort of encapsulating all of that. But yeah, the decadence and then also the underbelly and the
Yeah.
corruption and everything, like that dichotomy between or juxtaposition, I felt like was so intriguing. And then the politics adds another layer because it's like, okay, when you have this scenario, like what can you actually do about it?
Yeah.
Did, did you have like a clear sense of how they would interact in terms of if you had them kind of as two separate world kernel, I guess?
So, I mean, I kind of always knew that they were going to interact pretty seamlessly just because Ingrid comes from a very different place than her peers. She does not come from wealth. She comes from poverty and a really kind of difficult upbringing in this, kind of bouncing around until she found this place at school where she finally feels like she can achieve something. And this kind of misguided impression that she has that the only way to have value is to have wealth, and that she gets that from her father who was living in poverty and was trying to achieve a better life for them, but she has seen his example and has chosen to follow the goals but like through a different pathway. And she was always going to have this comparison of the two as separate but holding them both together as one within herself. So she kind of views them as separate, but inside her they're both, she has both worlds. She exists in both worlds and she has a lot of experience in both worlds. So they are essentially one world to her, but the way that she sees things is so split because of the upbringing that she's had and because of the way that the world tells you what is valuable and what's not.
Yeah, I think that ethical conflict you're talking about was part of the reason, one of the reasons why I really loved her character as well. I think that part of her character journey and her character development is so much kind of parsing out the ways that they've interacted. Because I feel
Mhm.
like, and we can talk about this as well, like the creation of Ingrid as a character, I feel like there's a lot that she has to unpack, and it takes a long time for her to like realize the ripple effects, and I feel like
Yeah.
she compartmentalizes very well, but until she doesn't.
Yeah. And that was something that like I drew on for myself in a lot of ways, just in that when I was younger, it was very much like I would be told things or I'd be shown things by adults and it would just kind of take it at face value. And then it would take me a long time to process it and figure out, wait a minute, no, that's not how I feel. That doesn't make any sense. And for her, I felt like that was kind of doubly the case because she does not have an adult in her life who is a parent figure. Her father's incarcerated. And so she doesn't have that consistent like adult figure who is available to her in a close intimate way. She's not able to question that from someone that she trusts. She's only able to question it on like a larger scale. And that's really scary, especially when you're young. It can feel really overwhelming. And so I wanted to be real about that. And I know that there will be, varying opinions about how quickly she moves through those emotions and how quickly she moves through those thoughts. But I really wanted to be true to that and just be honest about how difficult that is, because I think that oftentimes we make it seem so easy in fiction, and then in the reality it's not that way. And people can get stuck in that if they don't feel like they have permission to not know the answers and be uncertain.
Yeah, and I think what you were saying as well before about this kind of push towards wealth without really
Mhm.
considering either the ramifications, but also like what I really also liked about Ingrid is that it's okay, I'm pushing, I'm going towards somewhere,
Mhm.
but not like, okay, but what happens when you get there, right?
Yeah.
Like, it's always kind of like, I'm gonna hustle and hustle and keep doing, and
Mhm.
then, you get closer and closer and you realize, like, you're not feeling necessarily, like, happier
Mhm.
or,
Yeah, and
better about yourself.
that is fully from my own experience. I joke about it because I don't know to what degree I really believe in astrology, but, like, I am a Capricorn to the max. I am a parody of Capricorns. It's ridiculous. Like, I am so goal oriented. I pick a goal and I go for it. And I spent 6 years of my life trying to achieve something that I didn't really want. And it's kind of odd, but I used to be a professional swing dancer. And I had this goal of, like, I wanted to be a champion level swing dancer. And I spent 6 years training and working on it and, spending money to learn and competing, and I made it to the all-star level. I was getting ready to take the plunge, to, like, really, really go professional with it. And it was right as I was like I was out of college. It had been a couple of years and I was unhappy. I was, like, still unhappy. And it was like, why am I still unhappy? All of my dreams are coming true. Like, what's going on? And I took a minute to just really think about, like, well, what have I always wanted from my childhood? Like, did I ever really want to be a professional dancer? No. I grew up dancing and I didn't want that life. That was specifically a life I did not want. I wanted to be a writer. And when I had, like, really sat down and thought about, like, well, why do I want these things and why am I achieving them? And why am I putting energy into them? It was like, oh, that's not the thing that you actually want. So let's regroup and figure it out and figure out a different path. And it took me so long to get there because the way that society values immediate reward and the way that competition supplies that. And whereas writing is this thing that you do behind closed doors for years and years and years until finally you break out. And so there was this imbalance of reward happening. And I think that I put that into Ingrid of this goal of wealth, this goal of status, but without really thinking about what does that mean for her, and are those things she actually wants, or are those just things that the world has told her to want? And she has to figure that out for herself.
Yeah, I feel like it's loosely, or some of the things that you're saying, I feel like loosely echo, I think, struggles that I'm having, but also struggles that a lot of other people are having, which is in these times, like
Yes.
currently, struggling with this idea of like hyper productivity and productivity
Mhm.
equaling self value. And I felt like, I
Yeah.
don't know if I don't know if it just
The
like
hustle.
specifically hit me harder in Fire Becomes Her, but I was like, whoa.
Yeah. Well, I think there's and this is, I'm sure there are smarter people saying this in ways that are smarter than I will say it, but there's this concept of, the American dream of, like, working your way up, you know, working a job so that you can provide for your family so that they can have a better life, and this idea of if you work hard enough, you will eventually be rich. And it's so false, and we have seen it disproven so many times throughout the years. And this idea that people think about law and voting with the idea in the back of their head that someday they might be rich, and that they don't want to put sanctions on rich people because what if someday they're a rich person? But the truth is if we don't do that, then they won't become rich. There's no way. And so there's this, like, intense drive to become this idealized thing, but the idealized thing is, it's this impossible goal because of the way that we've set ourselves up. And so this idea that society wants you to become richer or more famous or more beautiful, but you can't actually achieve those things without society's assistance. And their pressure for you to do those things is just not, it's not going to result in an achievement that you want. And so I really wanted to play around with that idea of this, like, this dream of, the house and 2.5 kids and a white picket fence as this ultimate goal that society is pushing on so many people without examining what it means for them, examining whether or not that's even possible, and the way that we feel that we have failed if we can't achieve it, even if it's not what we want.
Yeah, I love what you were saying also about like how it's, wish fulfillment in a way, but you're not going to get there. I felt like that
Mhm.
theme or that political theme and political I don't know, maybe I don't really know the right word to describe it, but like
Mhm.
idea is so well reflected in Fire Becomes Her, like through a variety of different characters, and not only Ingrid's character journey, but I don't know necessarily how much like I don't love I accidentally spoil other things for other people, so I don't know how much I actually can say about
It's funny.
anything.
And this may be like a weird unpopular opinion, but like I did not write Fire Becomes Her to be surprising. I didn't write it to be twisty. I didn't write it to be like a book that makes you gasp or anything like that. I wrote it to be a book that makes you think. And so I don't really I personally don't believe that there are really any spoilers to be had. I think that it's a fairly predictable story in terms of like the plot. I did not intend for it to be wildly unpredictable. Although I think there was a review that called me pleasantly unpredictable and I enjoyed that. But like it was like I didn't write it to be twisty. And I'm very happy if people find it that way. That's great. But I don't think that there's a whole lot to be spoiled in terms of like the themes. It's pretty obvious like what direction I'm going with them. So um yeah, I don't know that you have to worry too much about that.
Yeah, because I wanted to talk, and I can't. I'm blanking on names. But I wanted to talk about Ingrid's like mentor figure because I think
Oh, um, do you mean Gwendolyn?
yes,
Yes.
Gwendolyn.
Okay.
Because I feel like she really embodies a lot of the things that we were talking about, right? Like this
Mhm.
idea about when people get stuck in this kind of like that snake that's eating itself is
Yeah.
its own tail, I think. And I thought
Yes.
that the way that she's able to distill it, and also kind of what you're talking about, having a not authority, a parental kind of figure,
Yeah.
Ingrid, I thought that she embodies both of those so well.
Yeah. I really wanted to with Gwendolyn. She's such an odd character for me because in an original draft she was the villain. In a very very old draft, like first draft before it was even bought, before Scholastic purchased it, I was like I had outlined it and she was going to be the villain. There was going to be this big twist at the end where like she was trying to like cheat in the election. And then a friend of mine was like, "Do you really want right after watching a woman lose the election for being and being accused of cheating when she did not cheat? Is that something you really want to put in a book?" And I was like, "No, it is not." So I changed it, and I am actually really glad because she turned into this character who was just so much more impactful. I think she has a much more interesting and genuine connection with Ingrid and their experience as two people who are being very pressured to become this idealized version of people in their society. They're both under that pressure. Um and Gwendolyn has achieved it and Ingrid gets to see that example of someone who has achieved it, and then when she gets closer to her she realizes that she's achieved it, but that's not the end of the journey. There's something after that and she has to start thinking about that. So Gwendolyn really became a big part of Ingrid's understanding of herself and the idea of planning ahead even past that goalpost. It's I can get really intense tunnel vision when I'm goal oriented and stuff, and it's I have to achieve this, I have to achieve this. And then as soon as I've done it, it's like, okay, well now, not to quote The West Wing, but what's next? And I have to like stop because if I get to that point and I don't know what's next, I'll panic. So it's like you have to know. And that was something that I really wanted for Ingrid to like really grapple with.
Yeah, and I think what you're saying also about Gwendolyn is also so not only that aspect, but also like the aspect I think because Ingrid struggles a lot with what we were saying before, her relationship to her past, and I felt
Mhm.
like as you were saying for in Gwendolyn, like in Gwendolyn, she sees an example of success, but for Gwendolyn, like her relationship to her own past is much different than how Ingrid feels about her past. Like when she goes back to memories and visits,
Mhm.
people from her past, it really kind of
Yeah.
brings it back up in a like startling way for her.
Yeah, and it's so funny that you bring that up because that was another thing that was not in the original plan for the book. I had no plans for Ingrid to return to her past in any way. She was really her dad was really the only connection for her, and bringing that in and having her confront it, or actually rather having it confront her, and having it really be brought to her in such a way where she can't ignore it and she has to be reminded and also kind of forced to grapple with the idea that she has cut a piece of herself off, and that was a choice that she made, not something that was done to her. And she has to really admit to that and own up to it and try to do better. Because I think a lot of the time, she has a little bit of a complex about being brought up this way and being in a part of society that does not accept her. And so I think to her it was something that was done to her by this, the rich and mighty, that they made her conform. And the reality is that she chose to conform and that there was a choice there for her. And that's complicated. It's not necessarily a good or a bad thing. It is a complicated feeling that she has to deal with. But yeah, leaving that self behind has had left her like a little bit broken, and she needed to go back and kind of see for herself that that world had moved on to, that it wasn't just frozen in time.
Yeah, and also I feel like the struggle for Ingrid as well for sort of acceptance, but like
Mhm.
in a tangible way. Because I think that wealth
Yeah,
is tangible in the sense you can track it,
exactly.
quantitatively. But
Mhm,
I felt like it's even more powerful or more impactful because it
mhm.
signifies acceptance. And I feel like for Ingrid, it's that like social acceptance, but also I think it's because in a lot of ways she's having trouble accepting her own self.
Yes, absolutely. And it's such a like, again, I'm a parody of a Capricorn. I'm so sorry. But like you can like you said, it's tangible. Wealth is a tangible way to measure success. It's a tangible way to measure acceptance in some ways. You can put that on a spreadsheet, but you can't put emotional acceptance and social acceptance on a spreadsheet. That's not something that you can measure. The acceptance and love of a community is something that is its own creature. It is not one thing. It is very adaptable, and it can change depending on who you are and who they are. And it looks different for everyone. And so it's not something that she's seen an example of in her life that she feels like she can replicate. And so that's something that she has to go out and find and experiment and kind of figure out, what does that look like for her?
Yeah. Did you have any changing like feeling towards Ingrid when you were drafting, or like because you mentioned some very very startling differences between the book that you had earlier and then the book that I
Mhm.
read. So
Yeah. Well, as much as I'm a big fan of spreadsheets and planning and like plotting things out, and I do always write a synopsis before I start writing, mostly because you have to in publishing in order to sell a book. I am a discovery writer when it comes to characters specifically, and so I had to write my way through the story to find out who she was going to be. And so in the first draft, she was much more self-aware. She knew from the get-go that she was like aromantic and playing Lyndon, and like she was kind of a jerk. Like she was not a nice person, and she's still kind of a jerk, but like an understandable jerk. And in the first draft she was just kind of mean and like manipulative, and I realized it was going to be really hard for people to feel like they could be on her side. And in an original draft, she didn't have as big of a journey because I had put her where she needed to be already at the very beginning. And this is typical for me in every book I write. I write like the first third of it and then realize that they're way too self-aware about their flaws, and I need to dial it back so that they can become aware of their flaws as the story progresses. So yeah, that was that. And I did that in Tarnished Are the Stars as well with Nathaniel. In an original draft, he was like much more aware of the like problems that were going on in the settlement and his father and all this stuff, and he really needed to go through that journey. So I do that all the time. But yeah, Ingrid changed a great deal in the drafting process. But the person who changed the most in the drafting process was actually Lyndon, her boyfriend at the beginning of the story. Originally, in the original draft of the book, like the way I pitched it to my agent the first time I pitched it was going to be The West Wing meets John Tucker Must Die. And it was originally supposed to be about three girls who were all being, I guess, three timed by the same guy, and that was supposed to be Lyndon. So it was Ingrid. It was a character who no longer exists in the story, and it was going to be Louise. were the three girls who were all entangled with Lyndon. And they were all going to team up together to destroy him and his father politically. And they were going to do it from three different fronts. Like one of them was going to be on Gwendolyn's team working to destroy him from that side. One of them was going to be part of the rebels destroying him from there. And then the other one, Ingrid obviously, was going to infiltrate from the inside. And I started writing and I got 2 chapters in, and Lyndon was not a player. He was not that guy. He was an absolute simp for Ingrid. He would follow her to the ends of the earth. And I realized that I was writing the wrong story because that wasn't the person that was coming out on the page. I wasn't able to convincingly write like a gross dude. And my agent read like the first 3 chapters and she wrote me back and she was like, this is great. But I have to tell you, I do not believe for a second that Lyndon is going to cheat on her. And I was like, yeah, I got to change it. So he was supposed to be like an absolute jerk, like just villain guy. And he turned into a very complicated person who is still not, the person that she wants him to be, and is not the person, and she's not the person that he wants her to be. And they still have a really messed up relationship, but he's not the villain, if that makes sense. And he used to be. So there's a lot of changes that went into that.
I can't even imagine that happened.
Yeah, it was a very weird.
Because it's like, as I know, as reading the synopsis for Fire Becomes Her, like it's very clear that Ingrid is going to question a lot of things about her life. And so it's like, thinking about that perspective, but also thinking about Lyndon, like I think that Lyndon is, he's flawed like everybody, but like he's also super soft in like a kind of, not gullible, but like I think when you're talking about character journeys, right? Like he is a little bit further, needing to see a little bit more about like the world and the people he surrounds himself with and everything like that. And I just can't imagine him like having the suaveness to like 3 times.
He's not that guy at all. And I actually think that, like, I mean, for me personally, I'm much happier with that choice because I think that it means that Ingrid's journey to figuring out what she wants is actually it puts more of the onus on her to figure it out. Because if he was a jerk and he was like a cheater and had, scorned her and everything, then it would be much easier for her to walk away from that relationship. But it would be much harder for her to investigate her own feelings about romance and relationships in general, because her one example of it had been bad. Whereas in this situation, he does everything by the book. He does everything that he's supposed to do. He's romantic. He is, very thoughtful. He's, he's all eyes on her. He's very much in her corner. And for her to look at that and kind of have to weigh whether or not that's what she wants, I think is a much harder decision, which of course makes for a better story.
Yeah, I love that too, because I feel like at the very beginning, before I got to know Lyndon, I felt like because I knew that Ingrid was going to question, basically everything, I was kind of like maybe waiting for that other shoe to drop, being like, okay, you're really nice, but like, when's like the super bad, like thing going to happen? And then I realized like, no, he actually is kind of soft and like really is invested.
Something I have realized about myself as a writer, and it's so funny because I don't think I could have ever predicted this, but I am not one of those people who's going to ever really be able to write like the like suave, dark, handsome, bad boy. I'm always going to write boys who are very in touch with their emotions and are very like they want to do the right thing. And I think it comes from a place of like growing up. Most of the examples of men that I saw on TV or on movies and stuff like that, most of them were like sex crazed, horny jerks who were like on sitcoms, like all the guys on like Scrubs were just absolute jerks who only had one thing on the brain, or like How I Met Your Mother, like all of these TV shows that were giving me examples of like main characters who were men who were seeking out, romance. They were actually just terrible people. And I was like, wow, that's awful. And I went into life thinking that men were going to be terrible people. And most of the men that I have met are not. Most of them are nice, kind individuals who, want things the same way that I want things. And like they experience the same world that I do for the most part. To some extent, they may not have to hold their keys between their fingers going to the parking lot, but, they are human beings, and, that was really impactful for me realizing that because I had only been given this one version of men, which is the alpha male, and so wanting to write boys who are soft, who are allowed to have emotions, who are allowed to have complicated feelings and make choices that are maybe not in the direction of power, in the direction of, having it all, they maybe get to make those different choices, I think is something that I'm always going to do just because I don't feel like that gets enough love. I like to see that. It's I think it's nice to have male characters who get to engage with things like emotional depth and character development, and they're not all Batman.
Yeah. You had also said, because I want to talk a little bit about Ingrid and Ingrid's questioning and like her
Yeah.
own kind of clear journey slash, the development that happens in the book. And you had mentioned earlier, I think it really ties into what you said earlier about Lyndon making it so much more self-reflexive for her,
Yeah.
like as you said, it would have been super, super easy for her to be like, nah, like
Yeah. Yeah, it's much easier to walk away from a guy who's mistreating you than it is to walk away from a guy who's treating you on paper the way that you're supposed to be treated. And to recognize within yourself that that's something you don't want. And that's different from saying that guy was a bad boyfriend or that guy was, a crappy dude. Like that's not what she's saying. She's saying this isn't right for me. And that's a much harder thing to come by, I think. And like in my experience, at least, because I share that identity with Ingrid. We're both on the aromantic spectrum. For me, that was really hard to like be dating someone who was really nice and on paper checked every box and to still feel that like intense discomfort in the relationship and recognizing that that was something that was within myself and that I needed to walk away because that was the right choice for me. And that's I think a really really difficult thing to do. And so yeah, definitely giving putting the onus of that decision on Ingrid rather than giving her excuses to walk away, I think was really important to me.
In the initial concept of Fire Becomes Her, was Ingrid always going to be questioning her like feelings towards romance?
Yeah, so in every version of the book, she was always going to be on the aromantic spectrum. There were versions of the book where she knew that she was aromantic from the beginning, and there that just didn't feel right to me. Just with like reflecting on that type of experience, it felt like it was going to be more powerful for her if she had to grapple with that instead of knowing from jump and kind of putting up this front on purpose because she knew that it would get her places rather than putting up the front because she thought that that was normal. I think definitely a change from the first draft to the second. Um, and and then the other big thing was that in original drafts, she and Lyndon had a much more intense relationship that had a lot more going on in it. And I dialed that back a little bit because I felt like it was important to show the reservation on her part. Um, Having them be so entangled and so public about that was not working for the story, and that the publicness of their relationship being a conflict, I think was something that felt really true to that experience of it's not just about experiencing it one-on-one with a person and having those romantic gestures or things like that, but having that done in front of people and having an audience um brings in a third player kind of because there's then public perception of what that relationship is and what it should be, and that's a huge stressor. So that changed a little bit. And then in the original draft, there was not a there was not a ending. The ending was different, shall we say. I had originally planned for another relationship to flourish in a sequel and to really build that up much more slowly. But when I realized that I probably wasn't going to get a sequel, I didn't want to wait and hope that I would get to portray that kind of relationship, which is a queer platonic partnership. I really wanted to make sure that I gave that the space that I wanted to give it. I didn't want to leave it up to chance, shall we say.
Yeah, I think that part of me reading also Fire Becomes Her, I feel like there's so many pieces of Ingrid that is searching for what, as we were talking about earlier, like what is acceptable to, because we were saying she doesn't have like a parental figure. She also doesn't have really like a core family unit at all,
Yeah.
really.
Mhm.
And so she's kind of, you know, obviously not to the same extent that we were talking about with like How I Met Your Mother, right? But
Yeah.
it's still very much mired in these social expectations about like what a relationship is and what success is and like all of these things that she like can't really reach, I guess, without really
Yeah.
knowing she can't reach it.
Yeah. It's this idea of like it's the expectation. There's this expectation from the outside world of what a happy life should look like. And like that I think it can be so damaging because it only looks like one thing. And people are more diverse than that. People have very different goals and wants, and then the one happy future is not the only one way to exist in the world and to be successful. And we build that up as this ideal, and it's not necessarily ideal for everyone. So I did really want for her to grapple with the idea of changing her goals and changing what she wants once she realizes there's more out there. And this comes from a place of finding family, the found family. When she starts, she really only has one or two people that she trusts, and she doesn't trust them completely. She does hold them at arm's length, and that's Lyndon, who she holds at arm's length because of this relationship tension. And then her best friend Charlotte, who is her roommate, who I think in ways she feels um, that they are friends because they are roommates. And she worries, there's this sense of like, would we be friends outside of this? And yes, they would. Charlotte's great. So, and that is something that, they have an intense relationship as well, but she doesn't really have a core support system. She has one or two people and that's it. And that's not really enough for her. She needs a place that she feels comfortable being herself. And that's not the world that she has chosen to step into. And so when she does kind of decide to start spying on the other side, she is confronted with this group of people who are accepting with open arms. They are very welcoming of her and encouraging, and they want to teach her things, and they want to help her succeed in ways that she has never experienced before. She's been given this scholarship to attend this school, which should be the kind of community and help that she needs, but it's actually held her at arm's length from that community. So to then step into this other community and just be welcomed so much, it's really jarring for her and really intense for her. And the realization that she could be at home in that place is something that she has to weigh against this other home that she has envisioned for herself.
Yeah, and I really loved also reading the found family. I think is probably one of my favorite, if not favorite, like tropes in
Same.
my life in general.
Same.
But I also really loved reading Ingrid's queer questioning journey and her coming to terms with her aromanticism as well in this setting, because I feel like
Mhm.
I feel like I normally read that in like contemporary books set
Mhm.
in, our world.
Yeah.
And so part of it, I think what also drew me to it is the setting and how, I feel like queer people obviously have existed
Mhm.
forever, but
Yeah.
I feel like we don't see as many questioning or like stories like that in historical fiction period
Mhm.
settings as I really wish that we did.
Yeah. Well, I think that the questioning period of someone's journey is really powerful. And this is something that I've talked about a little bit on like a one-on-one basis with other authors who are in spaces where they're not really ready to come out yet. And there's this pressure to come out, this pressure to identify yourself because of like the own voices movement and people who want to know. And I get that that comes from a place of wanting to support diverse creators, but there's this stage of any queer identity where you are questioning. Everyone has experienced some form of questioning. I don't think very many people come out of the womb knowing exactly their labels. And we don't see it very often because I think a lot of people feel pressured to identify with labels specifically in front of an audience rather than free to express their feelings publicly without assigning a label. And so a lot of people aren't wanting to, label themselves or come out or talk about it or write about it because they're afraid that someone will just, pull a label out of them instead of allowing them the time and space to process their feelings and figure out what labels feel right or if labels feel right at all. And so we don't see a lot of questioning narratives, I think, especially in speculative fiction, um, largely because the questioning phase is not widely represented in terms of people who are talking about it in their own experiences. I know for me, when I was in my questioning phase, I was in the process of writing Tarnished Are the Stars, and I've written about this a little bit. With each draft, I learned a little bit more about myself and my own identity, and it's so funny because if that book had been bought even a year earlier, um, I would have lost so much growth in myself, but also in the characters. In an original draft of Tarnished Are the Stars, Anna and Nathaniel were the romantic couple, and it was weird, and I hated it. And the whole it did not vibe at all. Like, I sent it to a friend, and she was like, "I don't know if I'm buying this," and I was like, "Oh no, I can't. What am I supposed to do?" But the questioning phase is really important, and it's a big part of anybody's journey. So I hope that we get to see more stories like that, where we do have this uncertainty and journey to learning about oneself, even if it doesn't end up landing on labels, even if it is just about feeling comfortable and feeling um, celebrated for your feelings rather than the words that you choose to describe them.
Yeah, and do you have any other, like, do you have any favorite kind of queer historical fiction in general too? Because I feel like
Ew.
I would love to read like a
Yes.
hundred more.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of The Reckless Kind by Carly Heath. It's such a good historical fiction novel. It's got the found family. It has an aromantic asexual main character as well. It has three main characters, two boys who are gay, and then there's the aromantic asexual girl. And they have this sort of queer platonic um, relationship with her where they're a family. It's kind of a poly triad, but it's not romantic or sexual with her, and so it's really really powerful. It's set in a Scandinavian fantasy kind of like pocket that it's a made up country, but it doesn't have magic or anything like that. And it's about the three of them figuring out how to have this found family in a world that maybe doesn't accept queerness, and how to kind of build a life for themselves as independent people, but they're teenagers. And it's got a horse race, so it's got like a little bit of like Scorpio races vibes. But it's fantastic. It's so atmospheric. The writing is absolutely gorgeous, lyrical. I loved it. So definitely recommend that. I'm trying to think what else there is. In terms of historical fiction, I literally just made a video about this. A Clash of Steel, CB Lee. Fantastic. It's a Treasure Island remix, so like on the high seas, pirates and stuff, and it's very queer. I love that one. It's so good.
Sorry, just writing them
Yeah,
in the
put
chat.
put in the comments.
I felt like I read actually The Reckless Kind like over Christmas, which was the
Mhm.
perfect time to read it because it's like super snowy and
Yeah,
super
it's such a cozy
horse
vibe.
racy. But it was so good. Like the relationship between the three of them was just like
Mhm.
so sweet and precious, like watching it grow and develop. And
Yeah. I love them. I think that the three of them. This is one of my favorite books. It has been for a very long time. Carly and I actually met back in like 2016. We were both like applying for mentorship programs at the same time, and we have leapfrogged each other in publishing. She got an agent before me, and then I got an agent, and then she got a new agent, and then I got published, and then she got published. And it's like it's been this very fun journey to go on with her, and we're still very good friends. And having read that book way back then, I have always been in awe of Carly's writing ability. She is just, she just does an incredible job at building the atmosphere, and she has this lyrical prose that is so beautiful, and I just can't wait to see what she writes next. She's so good.
yeah, speaking of kind of genres and whatnot, so was it weird to switch from like Tarnished to
Mhm.
Fire Becomes Her and switched? It's all speculative, but like You know, there are different kind of, they're
Yeah.
different vibes to
They're
it.
definitely different vibes. I actually found that writing Fire Becomes Her, the setting was easier. I didn't have to think quite so much about technology. But also, you know, Tarnished Are the Stars is set in a kind of far-flung future that's at least loosely related to our own. It feels like it's supposed to be the future, our future. And so I did have some considerations to make as far as like what sorts of things would be available and what kinds of thought patterns, you know, might people be using in the government and things like that. Whereas in Fire Becomes Her, I was really able to like kind of like pulled a little pocket and was like, okay, I'm gonna make a world that's like ours, but it's different. It's a fantasy 1920s. So kind of like how, you know, Game of Thrones is fantasy medieval. This is fantasy 1920s. And I really got to have a lot more freedom because it is fantasy. I don't have to worry so much about what is possible and what is not. I made myself a promise early on in drafting that I wasn't going to put any sort of technology or anything in the book that wasn't available in the 1920s because I wanted to preserve the vibe. But I did actually break that rule partway through the story because I have a trans character who a transmasc non-binary, and I wanted to address, you know, their story, and I wanted to give them what they wanted and make sure that they were able to access the medical care that they needed and things like that. And so I was able to fudge that a little bit because it was very different in the 1920s than it would be now. But I wanted to make that accessible for him and make sure that, you know, he got what he wanted. And so that was a little bit different. I was looking back rather than looking forward. But for the most part, I feel like science fiction and fantasy are two sides of the same coin. It just kind of depends on what you're calling the speculative element. Are you calling it technology or are you calling it magic? And with technology, there's a little bit less freedom sometimes if you're trying to make it hyper realistic. But with magic, you do have a lot of freedom to set your own rules. But either way, it's a very similar vibe.
Yeah, I'm also a huge fan of these historical fantasies. I don't know if that's
Mhm.
going to be one of these like subgenres,
I
but I
hope
think like
so.
what is it? I think can't remember the exact title, but like the girl with the red balloon.
Yes.
So yeah,
Um,
how that's like
uh,
historical, but also very fantasy as
yeah,
well.
Catherine Locke, right?
Yeah,
Yeah, I love their
I love
books.
that
They're
subgenre
so cool.
genre.
Yeah. They have a new one, this Rebel Heart coming out, that looks incredible. So I'm really excited for that too.
Yeah. Speaking of prohibition vibe books, we have a question. Other favorite prohibition vibe books? I actually can't think of any others. So
There are definitely a few. So there's one coming up by Allison Saft. A Far Wilder Magic is 1920s inspired, and it's just I mean, Allison Saft is one of my favorite authors. She's incredible. She blows me away every time. So definitely worth checking that out. Um, I feel like I'm gonna get the title wrong. I think there's one called Bright Ruined Things. I think by Samantha Coho.
yeah, the,
I
like the
haven't
blue
read it,
cover
but it's
with
the
the
blue
like
cover. Yeah, I remember when the cover came out, I had like major cover envy because I was like, oh, that's the cover I want. And then like, you know, of course I got a cover that I love, so it's fine. But I remember seeing it and being like, oh no. And I'm really excited for that one. It sounds really good. I haven't read it yet. And then there's Wild and Wicked I have it. It's in the corner of the room right over there. The title is slipping out of my brain. But it's by Francesca May. Um, I think it's like a Wild and Wicked Magic or something like that. But let me just quickly look it up on my handy dandy phone right here.
yeah, I also have that one. I can't remember if it's Wild and Wicked Magic.
Wild and Wicked Things. Here we go.
Oh wow.
There we go. So that one is also coming up. For books that are currently out right now, one to always check out is the Amber Low Trilogy. Those are really, really good. They're adult fantasy though.
Yeah, I feel like all of the ones that you mentioned that are not out
Yeah.
yet are on my like TBR.
Yeah. I feel like there's definitely some more 1920s inspired stuff out there that I'm forgetting. But those are the ones that come to mind right now.
Another question we have is, what's a good song for each book?
Ooh. Um, it's been so long since I have even listened to my Tarnished Are the Stars playlist. Um, I think uh, I genuinely do not remember anything that was on that playlist. I have blocked it out of my memory so intensely, but I can tell you for Fire Becomes Her, um, an excellent, excellent song for it is the Hamilton remix, the mixtape version of Burn. It's called First Burn, and it is incredible. It's like five different people who played the character Eliza singing a remixed version of Burn, and it's gorgeous. And that's actually one of the songs that like heavily inspired the book originally, which is why there was this whole like John Tucker must die like cheating plot line, because I was like, it's so inspired by that song. Obviously it changed, but I do really like that song for Fire Becomes Her. Genuinely cannot think of a single song for Tarnished Are the Stars. Um,
I love that it's
I mean,
called
there are
Burn too.
yeah, I mean, that's a good one. I have a whole playlist for Fire Becomes Her, which I can post on social media, or we can put it up somewhere. I have a whole Spotify playlist for it.
Speaking of Burn, Flicker and Flare, were
Mhm.
those like always did you always know that those were going to be the words that you wanted to use to describe the
Yeah. So
magic?
the book was actually originally called Flicker and Flare, and that was the original title. And we changed it for a couple of reasons. I don't think that this was one of the real reasons why we changed it, but it was my reason why we changed it. And it's because if we'd kept Flicker and Flare, the initials for it would have just been like FF, and I felt like that would be really misleading for people who know me and know my books and would think that it was going to be like a female romance. And that's not what it is. So I was like, we have to change the title so that people don't think that it's going to be this, because I don't want to mislead people into thinking that that's what's going to happen. But yeah, it was originally called Flicker and Flare, and the reason for that was because I felt like Ingrid's personal experience of um her journey to social status was reflected strongly in the concepts of flicker and flare of different types of magic. She feels very much like she is flicker. She is fake magic. She is, she's an imposter. And what she strives to be is flare, which is the true magic, the raw, very powerful fire magic that can do all the cool things. And so I felt like that was really indicative of her journey, but we did change it in the end. And I'm happy with that choice too.
Is there a story behind it? Because what I loved about the title is that it felt like, even though obviously all the words are like real words to the
Yeah.
title, it also felt like different in a way that it felt like the way that it's framed,
Mhm.
fire becomes her and not like
Yeah.
she becomes fire or whatever. I felt like
Yeah.
the subject verb placement was really
Yeah.
intriguing with that title.
Well, I really like the kind of the way that there's different meanings behind it. Fire becomes her in that, like, it obviously spoilers, but like in the end, she is able to harness the fire and kind of meld with it in this way where she feels very powerful, and she is able to finally use flare in a big way. And so that it partly that, but also fire becomes her in the idea that fire complements her. It is something that she looks good in it. It's the kind of idea that like power and ambition and drive are all kind of part of what the metaphor of fire is in the book. But it's also anger, it's also frustration. And there's a lot of different elements of that. It's also love and acceptance and finding this, passion for a cause that you want to fight for. So it really means a lot of different things. And so the idea that all of those things come together to make up who she is, and that once she finds all the pieces, then she gets to like kind of fully actualize, but also that all of those things look good on her. It's the idea of this aesthetic concept of, in the end, these things that she was searching for all come together and create a really nice complementary uh image for her of what she ends up looking like in the end.
Yeah, I just loved all these various like permutations of fire, and like to me also rebellion seems like super fiery, and then
Yeah.
also like the prohibition style, like with the alcohol, well, and not with like alcohol necessarily, but the idea of
Yeah.
alcohol being an accelerant, like all of that,
Mhm.
all the different fire contexts and stuff, like I
Yes.
thought really added to the book.
I think there was an editorial letter that I got at one point in the process that was like, "How many different fire metaphors have you made in this book?" Like how many different things are fire? This is ridiculous. It's so layered. And I was like, "Whoops, sorry." Oh well. But that was definitely on purpose. But it was very much. It felt kind of serendipitous that I had chosen this specific thing to be the theme, and that it jived so well with that metaphor.
Yeah, I loved it. I loved all the fire, like all the different, yeah, permutations of
Hmm.
fire and the way that it's used in it, like
Hmm.
sort of as weapons, but also power and as like empowerment and
Hmm.
power, like all of these different things.
Hmm.
Um, we've mentioned prohibition, like upcoming
Yes.
prohibition vibe books, but do you have any other like upcoming speculative fiction books that are
Yeah.
on your radar?
Oh my gosh, I feel like you asked that question in every single book that I'm excited for just emptied out of my brain. Um, uh, oh no. um, there must be something. Oh, I am very excited about the Vermilion Emporium, which actually I think might also be 1920s inspired. But it's supposed to be like Radium Girls, but fantasy. Um, and that one sounds like amazing. I'm really, really excited for that. I'm also really excited for Emily Victoria's next book. I think is called Silver in the Mist. And that's going to be a romantic asexual protagonist fantasy, which I'm always very excited for. Um, yeah, those are the ones that are coming to mind. Feel like there must be more, and I'm just like my brain is not supplying them. It's like the second someone's like, "What's on your TBR?" You're like, "My what?"
No, I know. I feel like every time I ask that, and also every time I write it, I'm always like, "Oh yeah, these are on my TBR." But then when I ask them live in a panel, it's just like
Mhm. Yeah.
completely gone
Oh,
away.
another one that I'm excited for is Not Good for Maidens.
Hmm.
That one's gonna be really good, by Tori Bovalino. I actually have an arc of that. I'm very excited about it. It's so atmospheric and cool.
Yeah, I felt like all the covers also for like because Vermilion
Yeah.
Emporium just came out recently. I feel like all the
Yes, the
covers were
covers
so
just got
vibey.
released. Yeah, it looks so good. I'm really excited. I feel like fantasy covers are just, like, knocking it out of the park these days.
Mhm. And
Yeah.
your cover is also gorgeous. Did you have any like say in that? Because
Let's
I
look at it
love
again. It's so pretty.
the glittery. Because I was like at first I was like,
It
is it
does. It
glitter? Is it
glitters.
fairy
Yeah.
lights?
Yeah, it's kind of got, like, a little fairy lights thing going on. The UK edition actually has, gold foil, lettering, and then also, like, parts of her dress are gold foil on the UK edition. But I haven't gotten any UK versions yet, so I haven't seen it in person. But I've been so lucky when it comes to covers with Scholastic. They have just knocked it out of the park basically every time. I think my only note that I sent back on this one when they sent me the final cover was, "Can we make the title just a little bit bigger?" Because originally it was a little bit smaller, and it's still pretty small. So, I was like, maybe the title could be larger. And that was like my only note. They did send me, the process for figuring out the cover. The original cover drafts were like they were playing around with the idea of putting like items on the cover instead of a person, and they gave me that idea, and they were asking like what items would make sense to put on the cover, and I basically came back and I said, look, here are some items you could put on the cover. I don't think any of these are important enough to put on a cover for this book. I think the only thing that makes sense to put on the cover for this book is Ingrid, because the title is Fire Becomes Her. She is the central part of the story. It is a character journey. It is not about, you know, a champagne glass that's on fire. It is not about a lipstick tube. It is not about a ballot. It is about her. And so they were very amenable to that. So that was good. And I think in an original mock-up they sent me like it was like photoshopped, like pasted together images of just like, this is what it's going to look like, but better. And I sent back like some description stuff of like, just so you know, Ingrid has short hair. Like, here's what she looks like, kind of stuff. And then when they came back with the final image, it was basically perfect. I had no real comments at that point.
Yeah, I love how, because I feel like with the title as well for fire, I feel like a lot of things could go very like actual fire. But what I
Yeah.
love for the ear cover is like how it's super subtle, but it's like very, it's like clear that it's fiery, but not in the like, oh my God, there's actual fire.
Yeah, it's like the fire is only at really the bottom of the book. Like if you look, there's like some actual flame down here, but there we go. But the rest of it is like, is that fire or is it like magic? And that's kind of the idea, is that, this magic, it is fire magic, but it's used in ways that are different. It's not always used to like light things on fire. Sometimes it's used for artistic purposes. People use it as an illumination in makeup. It allows their skin to be glittery. They use it as like a stitching in thread to allow their dresses to glow. They use it in fireworks. They can use it physically to like emblazon cool messages on their clothes and stuff like that. Which I imagine that in like a 1980s version of this world, like sped up, there would be people with like jean jackets with like flare stuff on the back of the jean jacket. um, or maybe glow sticks exist, but they'd be flare glow sticks and stuff like that. So there's a lot of aesthetic purposes for flare as well as in heating your homes and running cars and stuff like that. So it's not just a destructive thing. It's not just one thing. It gets to be a lot of different things, and I enjoyed that process of figuring it out, and I think the cover really reflects that.
Yeah, and I do love that how it's so there's such a variety of ways that are like both very kind of like surface slash some might call it trivial, but then also very essential. Like you not
Mhm.
only need flare, you not only need flicker slash flare to like vote, which is obviously very
Yeah.
essential, but also like you need it as fuel, like you need it to
Mhm.
live.
Yeah, and that's kind of, I wanted to reflect what money is like in our world. Money is really important, and people say it a lot, vote with your wallet, vote with your wallet. Don't spend money in places that are, doing bad things politically and stuff like that. And not everybody has the privilege of being able to do that. We talk about that with where you buy your books. And there are people who, for me personally, I'm going to buy my books from my independent bookstore because I can afford to do that. But there were times in my life where I couldn't, and I needed to buy them from cheaper locations. And like, I don't want to vilify that. There are different ways that you have to use your money, and you can't always use it to do the thing that you want to be able to do, to do the right moral thing if you're in a position where you don't have very much. And it's the same with flair, vote with your wallet. But if you only have so much magic, you have to heat your home. You have to use it to run the car that you need to get to work. You need to use it for, electricity, things like that. So you can't use it to go vote. And even if you could, your amount that you can use to go vote is nowhere near the amount that somebody else who has, millions and millions of gallons of flair, essentially, they can afford to part with much more, and that's going to have a much bigger impact. So even though in America, at least, in the US, one person, one vote is a thing, there's still this element of money matters. It has a huge impact on elections, and I wanted to reflect that in the magic.
Yeah, I loved how it like so seamlessly interwoven, and so seamlessly worked with the politics and like
Mhm.
the way that it breaks down. Because I think you do a really fantastic job of like breaking it down, not only for Ingrid, but like that's the lens that
Mhm.
we readers are using, but also the way that it interacts so much.
Mhm.
But I could talk about it forever because I loved it so much. The magic
I'm
and
so
the
glad.
world was like one of my favorite elements besides Ingrid. But I am so happy that we were able to chat
Me too. Yeah, thanks
about
for having
these.
me.
I still have such fond memories of doing like one of the very first like makeup like inspired
Yeah.
things I was trying to do was for Tarnished. And so when I was like putting together their graphics, it was kind of this fun, like nostalgic, like, oh
Yeah, that
wow,
was so cool.
so much has changed.
It's been so long. So many years in between books.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I have thank you so much for hanging out and chatting and for talking about world building and also all of these
Absolutely.
great recommendations, which I put in the chat. And
Awesome.
then obviously for anyone else, there's the link to the book slash I think the bookshop link is down below to buy the books and to enjoy it with us. Hopefully everyone has like a better sense of the characters in the world and doesn't mind all the things that we talked about in terms of character growth. But as you said, I love the approach of like not writing it like it's gonna be this like heart-stopping thriller.
Yeah.
It's not that at all.
Yeah, I do. I think that there's this pressure in fantasy and sci-fi to always write something that's going to be super surprising and, intense, heart-stopping thriller. There's that pressure to do something like that. And for me, I'm always more drawn to stories about character. There's this new push for like cozy fantasy, and I don't think this is cozy by any means, but I am very, very drawn to stories that are about characters like learning about themselves, and I wanted to write something like that that was really for me. It's something that this is kind of silly, but they say that authors have to have really thick skin to withstand bad reviews and things like that, but I think that we have to have very um, we have to withstand uh our own criticism of our own books. And like with Tarnished, I walked away from that book feeling like I had wrung it through just so many times that I no longer really recognized it and myself at the end of it, and I felt like I'm still very proud of it, but it's something that I look back on differently. And with Fire, when it came out, I was still very proud of it. I loved that book. There was no stage in writing that book where I didn't love it. And that was really powerful for me and like different because you don't usually get that. And I realized that at the end, like, I still love this book and I wrote it for me, and I am my target audience for this book. And I hope that other people like it. But the fact that I still like it is really cool. And I hope everybody else does too. But that's kind of like I can hold on to that feeling and know that I did what I set out to do. And that's really cool.
Yeah, I agree. I think it is cool, and I think that yeah, that there is this like push, yeah, for like all like third act, like climax kind of storyline
Hmm.
twist that no one is expecting, and I feel like that's so much pressure, and it's not really,
Yeah, and
it's
there are
not
incredible
what
books
serves the
that do
story.
that. There are books that do that way better than I do, and I'm fine with letting them be, you know, the rulers of that genre. I'm happy for them to do it better than I do it.
Yeah. Thank you so much for chatting, and thank you for everyone for watching. And yes, I hope that everyone adds it to their TBR
Thank
and
you.
reads a copy and falls in love with the world and the characters, specifically Ingrid, as much as we both have. All right. I hope everyone has a really great day slash evening slash whatever. Um, and yeah, thank you again to Rosie and for everyone who's watching.
Thanks for having me.